Ascalante did not look toward the door. He had eyes only for the wounded king. He supposed that the noise of the fray had at last roused the palace, and that the loyal guards were upon him, though even in that moment it seemed strange that his hardened rogues should scream so terribly in their flight. Conan did not look toward the door because he was watching the outlaw with the burning eyes of a dying wolf. In this extremity, Ascalante's cynical philosophy did not desert him. "All seems to be lost, particularly honor," he murmured. "However, the king is dying on his feet, and—" Whatever other cogitation might have passed through his mind is not to be known, for, leaving the sentence uncompleted, he ran lightly at Conan just as the Cimmerian was perforce employing his axe-arm to wipe the blood from his blinded eyes. But even as he began his charge, there was a strange rushing in the air, and a heavy weight struck terrifically between his shoulders. He was dashed headlong, and great talons sank agonizingly in his flesh. Writhing desperately beneath his attacker, he twisted his head about and stared into the face of nightmare and lunacy. Upon him crouched a great black thing which he knew was born in no sane or human world. Its slavering black fangs were near his throat, and the glare of its yellow eyes shriveled his limbs as a killing wind shrivels young corn. The hideousness of its face transcended mere bestiality. It might have been the face of an ancient, evil mummy, quickened with demoniac life. In those abhorrent features the outlaw's dilated eyes seemed to see, like a shadow in the madness that enveloped him, a faint and terrible resemblance to the slave Thoth-Amon. Then Ascalante's cynical and all-sufficient philosophy deserted him, and, with a ghastly cry, he gave up the ghost before those slavering fangs touched him. Conan, shaking the blood drops from his eyes, stared frozen. At first he thought it was a great black hound which stood above Ascalante's distorted body. Then, as his sight cleared, he saw that it was neither a hound nor a baboon. With a cry that was like an echo of Ascalante's death-shriek, he reeled away from the wall and met the leaping horror with a cast of his axe that had behind it all the desperate power of his electrified nerves. The flying weapon glanced singing from the slanting skull it should have crushed, and the king was hurled halfway across the chamber by the impact of the giant body. The slavering jaws closed on the arm Conan flung up to guard his throat, but the monster made no effort to secure a death grip. Over his mangled arm it glared fiendishly into the king's eyes, in which there began to be mirrored a likeness of the horror which stared from the dead eyes of Ascalante. Conan felt his soul shrivel and begin to be drawn out of his body, to drown in the yellow wells of cosmic horror which glimmered spectrally in the formless chaos that was growing about him and engulfing all life and sanity. Those eyes grew and became gigantic, and in them the Cimmerian glimpsed the reality of all the abysmal and blasphemous horrors that lurk in the outer darkness of formless voids and nighted gulfs. He opened his bloody lips to shriek his hate and loathing, but only a dry rattle burst from his throat. But the horror that paralyzed and destroyed Ascalante roused in the Cimmerian a frenzied fury akin to madness. With a volcanic wrench of his whole body, he plunged backward, heedless of the agony of his torn arm, dragging the monster bodily with him. And his outflung hand struck something his dazed fighting brain recognized as the hilt of his broken sword. Instinctively he gripped it and struck with all the power of nerve and thew, as a man stabs with a dagger. The broken blade sank deep, and Conan's arm was released as the abhorrent mouth gaped as in agony. The king was hurled violently aside, and lifting himself on one hand he saw, as one mazed, the terrible convulsions of the monster from which thick blood was gushing through the great wound his broken blade had torn. And as he watched, its struggles ceased, and it lay jerking spasmodically, staring upward with its grisly dead eyes. Conan blinked and shook the blood from his own eyes. It seemed to him that the thing was melting and disintegrating into a slimy, unstable mass. Then a medley of voices reached his ears, and the room was thronged with the finally roused people of the court. Knights, peers, ladies, men-at-arms, counselors, all babbling and shouting and getting in one another's way. The black dragons were on hand, wild with rage, swearing and ruffling, with their hands on their hilts and foreign oaths in their teeth. Of the young officer of the door guard nothing was seen, nor was he found then or later, though earnestly sought after.
"Grommel, Volmana, Rinaldo!"
exclaimed Publius, the high counselor, wringing his fat hands among the corpses.
"Black treachery! Someone shall dance for this! Call the guard!"
"The guard is here, you old fool!" cavalierly snapped Palantides, commander of the Black Dragons, forgetting Publius's rank in the stress of the moment. "Best stop your caterwauling and aid us to bind the king's wounds. He's like to bleed to death."
"Yes, yes!"
cried Publius, who was a man of plans rather than action.
"We must bind his wounds. Send for every leech of the court. Oh, my lord, what a black shame on the city! Are you entirely slain?"
"Wine!" gasped the king from the couch where they had laid him. They put a goblet to his bloody lips, and he drank like a man half dead of thirst.
"Good,"
he grunted, falling back.
"Slaying is cursed dry work."
They had stanched the flow of blood, and the innate vitality of the barbarian was asserting itself.
"See first to the dagger wound in my side,"
he bade the court physicians.
"Rinaldo wrote me a deathly song there, and keen was the stylus."
"We should have hanged him long ago,"
gibbered Publius.
"No good can come of poets. Who is this?"
He nervously touched Escalante's body with his sandaled toe.
"By Mitra!"
ejaculated the commander.
"It is Escalante, once Count of Thun. What devil's work brought him up from his desert haunts?"
"But why does he stare so?"
whispered Publius, drawing away, his own eyes wide and a peculiar prickling among the short hairs at the back of his fat neck. The others fell silent as they gazed at the dead outlaw.
"Had you seen what he and I saw,"
growled the king, sitting up despite the protests of the leeches,
"you had not wondered. Blast your own gaze by looking at—"
He stopped short, his mouth gaping, his finger pointing fruitlessly. Where the monster had died, only the bare floor met his eyes.
"Crom!" he swore. "The thing's melted back into the foulness which bore it." "The king is delirious,"
whispered a noble. Conan heard, and swore with barbaric oaths.
"By Badb, Morrigan, Macha, and the Main,"
he concluded wrathfully,
"I am sane. It was like a cross between a Stygian mummy and a baboon. It came through the door, and Escalante's rogues fled before it. It slew Escalante, who was about to run me through. Then it came upon me, and I slew it. How, I know not, for my axe glanced from it as from a rock. But I think that the sage Epimetheus had a hand in it. Hark, how he names Epimetheus, dead for 1,500 years,
they whispered to each other.
"By Emir!" thundered the king. "This night I talked with Epimetheus. He called to me in my dreams, and I walked down a black stone corridor carved with old gods, to a stone stair on the steps of which were the outlines of Set, until I came to a crypt, and a tomb with a phoenix carved on it.
In Mitra's name, Lord King, be silent!
It was the high priest of Mitra who cried out, and his countenance was ashen. Conan threw up his head like a lion tossing back its mane, and his voice was thick with the growl of the angry lion.
Am I a slave to shut my mouth at your command?
Nay, nay, my lord!
The high priest was trembling, but not through fear of the royal wrath.
I meant no offence.
He bent his head close to the king, and spoke in a whisper that carried only to Conan's ears.
My lord, this is a matter beyond human understanding. Only the inner circle of the priestcraft know of the black stone corridor carved in the black heart of Mount Golomira by unknown hands, or of the phoenix-guarded tomb where Epimetheus was laid to rest 1,500 years ago. And since that time no living man has entered it, for his chosen priests, after placing the sage in the crypt, blocked up the outer entrance of the corridor so that no man could find it. And today not even the high priests know where it is. Only by word of mouth, handed down by the high priests to the chosen few, and jealously guarded, does the inner circle of Mitra's acolytes know of the resting place of Epimetheus in the black heart of Golomira. It is one of the mysteries on which Mitra's cult stands.
I cannot say by what magic Epimetheus brought me to him, answered Conan. But I talked with him, and he made a mark on my sword. Why that mark made it deadly to demons, or what magic lay behind the mark, I know not. But though the blade broke on Grommel's helmet, yet the fragment was long enough to kill the horror.
Let me see your sword,
whispered the high priest from a throat gone suddenly dry. Conan held out the broken weapon, and the high priest cried out and fell to his knees.
Mitra, guard us against the powers of darkness, he gasped. The king has indeed talked with Epimetheus this night. There, on the sword. It is the secret sign none might make but him, the emblem of the immortal phoenix which broods forever over his tomb. A candle, quick! Look again at the spot where the king said the goblin died.
It lay in the shade of a broken screen. They threw the screen aside and bathed the floor in a flood of candlelight. And a shuddering silence fell over the people as they looked. Then some fell on their knees calling on Mitra, and some fled screaming from the chamber. There, on the floor where the monster had died, there lay, like a tangible shadow, a broad dark stain that could not be washed out. The thing had left its outline clearly etched in its blood, and that outline was of no being of a sane and normal world. Grim and horrific it brooded there, like the shadow cast by one of the apish gods that squat on the shadowy altars of dim temples in the dark land of Stygia.